of the University of KwaZulu-Natal is also joining us, Professor Nana Poku. And we're also joined by our keynote speaker, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. She's the Under-Secretary General of the UN, also the Executive Director for UN Women. We're also joined from the Luthuli Foundation by the family members and the family of the Luthuli family. And we're also joined by members of Council for the University of KwaZulu-Natal, members of the executive management of the university, deans and academics. We're also joined by management and officials from government. We're joined by Ms. Ila Gandhi, welcome, staff from the Luthuli Museum and the university, and the student leadership and alumni and captains of industry, political, business, and religious leaders. We're also joined by members of the Broughtville community and distinguished guests, and all protocols observed. We're also thrilled to welcome webinar attendees from all over the world, also watching from different parts of the African continent through the SABC News platform. Welcome to you all. At a time when leadership and ethical engagement, not only South Africa, but the world continues to be plagued by gender-based violence and the search for African solutions to a pandemic that has beset the world. This address by the Under-Secretary of the UN and Executive Director for UN Women, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, couldn't be more timely. She will address us later on, but for now, let us call upon our first speaker of the day, and that is Professor Nana Poku, who is the Vice Chancellor and Principal for the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor, you may take the mic.
Thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Professor Mlambo-Ngcuka. I'm going to be deputizing for the Vice Chancellor today. The Honorable Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mhlonishwa Mr. Nathi Mthethwa Unyambose, Professor Nana Poku, the Vice Chancellor, who is unable to be with us today, our Honorable Keynote Speaker, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Under-Secretary General and Executive Director, UN Women, Chairperson of the Luthuli Museum, Mr. Important Mkhize Kabazela, Chairperson of the Luthuli Foundation, Mr. Mthunzi Luthuli Madlanduna, Dr. Albertina Luthuli and the Luthuli family, members of Council, Luthuli Museum, members of Council, University of KwaZulu-Natal, members of Executive Management, University of KwaZulu-Natal, officials from government, universities, national and international, staff and students of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, departments of education, Ms. Ella Gandhi, alumni, captains of industry, political, business, and religious leaders, friends of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. It is my privilege to extend warm greetings to you all as we once again commemorate the ideals and achievements of Inkosi Mvumbi Luthuli. I am delighted that we are able to join together albeit virtually, for an event that is an important fixture and always highly anticipated in the university's calendar. I wish to extend very warm welcomes to you all on behalf of the university, home to the legacy of Inkosi Mvumbi Luthuli, a son of this province and a revered leader. We are delighted to be the host partner once again, even under these difficult circumstances. This year's theme, the 1995 World Conference on Women, whereto for South Africa and the rest of the African continent, speaks to the key values, policies, and practices of this institution, all of which promote the equal participation of women within the university and society at large. Our female staff and graduates feature prominently in platforms that promote women in all areas of poverty alleviation, research, women's rights, economic development, leadership, health, and a range of other arenas directly linked to the 1995 World Conference on Women. As a matter of routine, the university community is engaged in a great deal more than celebrating the accomplishments of its female staff and students. As a research and teaching institution, we are acutely aware of the vulnerabilities, disenfranchisements, and suffering still borne disproportionately by women both in South Africa and throughout the world. The impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have followed and deepened the contours of women's disadvantages, including reduced access to maternal health services and other essential services. In addition, the economic hardship due to COVID-19 is also greater for informal workers, the majority of whom are women. It is against this backdrop that we have embraced our obligation to play our part in advocating the rights and well-being of women through outreach and the activation programs in the larger community. Closer to home, our proud institution put in place stringent measures to guarantee an enabling environment in which women continue to be enabled to study, work, and live without the fear of gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. To this end, we have developed and implemented a gender-based violence policy and strategy, a reporting protocol, and numerous awareness campaigns for our students and staff. We are aware that this is not enough because the scourge of gender-based violence is deeply embedded in our communities, and we need to be doing more with you as our partners.
All right.
We are confident that the appropriate prevention, outreach, and awareness activities, communication strategies, and response mechanisms across all our colleges and campuses will maintain a safe academic and social environment for our women at our institution, and that our community outreach programs will also have an impact community-wise. At this juncture, it is of particular note that Inkosi Albert Luthuli, at the 1959 National Conference of the African National Congress's Women's League, urged the women to play their noble and heroic part in the liberation struggle. He noted that they were master tacticians and perfectly poised to increase their participation in the party's political aspirations. The women of this institution continue to honor this legacy, demonstrating time and again that they have what it takes to excel across the board when given the freedom, support, and safeguards. The University of KwaZulu-Natal cherishes the ideals of Inkosi Luthuli as far as the advancement of women is concerned, with our female graduates not only outnumbering their male peers, but only moving on to become award-winning leaders at all levels of society, in business, research, as well as the public and private sectors, locally, nationally, and globally. We welcome you, Madam Undersecretary, as a trailblazer and exemplar. Your outstanding achievements and professional engagement are as fine a testament to the spirit of the legendary Inkosi Mvumbi Luthuli as we could hope for. On that note, I want to thank you all, and we look forward to a good engagement with Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And it's at this time in the program that we bring in the Honorable Minister Nathi Mthethwa. Minister, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. You may please begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Program Director Desiree Chauke, the Luthuli family, former Deputy President of the Republic and the current UN Undersecretary, Director for Women, the Chairperson of the Luthuli Museum Council, Baba Kabazela, important Mkhize, members of the Council, the Director of the Luthuli Museum, Mr. Kaba, members of Luthuli Foundation, Professor Nhlanhla Ukubela, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head College of Humanities, members of the Council, the UKZN, members of Executive Management, UKZN, Renee Skuman, Commissioner on the Commission for Cultural, Religious and Language Rights, officials from the government, staff and students of UKZN, captains of industry, political, business, religious, traditional leaders, event sponsors and partners, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. I extend my warmest greetings to all of you present. I'm delighted that the Luthuli Museum Council and the executive have thought it appropriate to invite the Undersecretary of the United Nations Women, Director Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, whom we also know her as the former president of this republic. For the second time in a row, the Council has thought it wise and correct to invite a woman to speak and also to sustain a justifiable reorientation towards gender equality, which would have made President General of the African National Congress, Chief Albert Luthuli, smile. Program Director, you'll recall that the 13th memorial lecture was delivered by Samia Yaba Nkrumah, daughter of Ghana's first independence leader and the founding father of Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. We also recall that in 2016, a memorial lecture was delivered by Dr. Brigalia Bam, former chairperson of the South African Independent Electoral Commission, who saw South Africa through many challenges of its democratic elections until her retirement. Chief Luthuli would also be smiling at the events currently happening beyond our borders. When the African National Congress President General, Chief Albert Luthuli, visited the United States in 1948, he was barred from entering a restaurant until his hosts intervened to alert the restaurant owner that he was an important leader from South Africa. Today, Chief Luthuli would be smiling because for the first time in the history of that country, on the 20th of January 2021, they will be inaugurating the first woman vice president and the first one of color, Vice President-elect, Ms. Kamala Harris. I'm referring to his smile because gender blindness was second nature to him. In his youth, he was open to performing household chores which were reserved for girl children. Among the other chores was to draw water from the river for his mother. These would show later in all his pursuit, where he worked his heart out, a dignity of labor he always respected. As the country embarks on the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children, we hope that South African men, all of us as men, in 2020 and beyond, will emulate this example of a man who did not separate household chores according to gender as a way of mending their ways, so that the violence that is perpetuated against women, justifiably referred to as the second pandemic after the devastating COVID-19, stops here and now. It is those chores which became his way of life in everything else. The invitation of such a high-profile global leader could therefore have not been extended at a better time than this. The timing is also supplemented by the appropriateness of the theme itself, a build-up of the 1995 groundbreaking conference on gender equality. The theme, the 1995 World Conference on Women, where to for South Africa and the rest of the African continent. This theme conscientizes us to the road we as a country and as a people have traveled towards accepting men and women as equal contributors to the future of South Africa, the continent, and the whole world. One aspect of Chief Luthuli's life, which have sent shock to the patriarchal system, was his acceptance to the role of women in public life and by extension in the struggle. Evidence particularly from interviews between Chief Luthuli's daughter, who's here with us today, Dr. Albert Luthuli, and other researchers, exists of the equality of life within the Luthuli household. Both Umama Nokhanya Luthuli and daughters praised how their gender did not restrict them in the Luthuli household. Their education was gender equality, which was still a challenge to other nearby households where the role of women was restricted to the kitchen. For some households, school and education were not an option for girl child. As a chief of Groundville, Chief Luthuli's progressive approach to women's access to education rubbed off to abantu basemakholweni, over whom he was chief, and the Groundville community benefited greatly. Under Chief Luthuli's chieftaincy, Groundville produced its fair share of educated people, both men and women, no doubt a legacy that had been left on this small village by the likes of the chief himself and other eminent sons and daughters, such as isiZulu novelist Professor B.W. Vilakazi, the Mzonelis, the Gumedes, and many others whom I shall not mention due to time limitation. The Natal Inspector of Schools, Dr. Charles Templeman Loram, identified the young Chief Luthuli as worthy of bursary to study at Fort Hare, at the time, the only prime university for Black people on the continent. However, the young Chief Luthuli gave the much sought after opportunity a miss, preferring to start working to take care of his mother, who was advancing in age. A less caring individual would have grabbed the opportunity with both hands, but Chief Luthuli made the rational choice of prioritizing his mother than himself. According to Jill Kelly, in Gender, Shame and Efficacy of the Method of Struggle, 1959 Women's Rural Revolt, Chief Luthuli saw women as crucial for the influence they could have on the menfolk. He made a gender discourse part of the Congress movement's method of struggle. The chief wrote on the women's challenges to masculinity, hoping that women would shame men into getting involved in the struggle. Professor Smangaliso Khumalo of the then University of Natal, Peter Maritzburg, noted that during Chief Luthuli's time, a protected space was created for women, close quote. The creation of space for women defied the patriarchy, but it was also positive because it led to the rise of women leaders such as Lillian Ngoyi, Dora Damana, Gertrude Chope, Albertina Sisulu, Gladys Smith, Hilda Bernstein, Kathy White, Lillian Dederickx, and many other women leaders who led the struggle side by side with their men comrades. On women in struggle, Chief Luthuli had this to say, and I quote, "When the women begin to take an active part in the struggle, no power on earth can stop us from achieving freedom in our lifetime." The 1956 Women's March to the Union Buildings was an epoch-defining moment. He fully supported the march. On the 21st of July, 1967, Chief Luthuli, on that day where he lost his life, the two young ladies, Mrs. Bonga and Papale, her cousin, ran to Chief Luthuli to greet him. They walked with him for a while until he released them from accompanying him. Always convinced of education, he told the two young ladies they should be educated, citing education as the biggest weapon with which to defeat the enemy. Even when he was a few minutes from the train accident which took his life, before the day had ended, he spoke of the importance of education, particularly to young women. His voice still reverberates today. His words to the two young women who were the last to see him call on all of us, now that his party is in government, the African National Congress, to carry out his dream of creating conditions for women to access education. It is a dream we dare not forget. Program Director, I'm stating all this in my introductory remarks to emphasize that when a daughter of the soil, such as Ms. Mlambo-Ngcuka, is invited to deliver a lecture on this topic, it is appropriate because Chief Luthuli held women in high esteem and promoted their cause, advancement, and progress. Thank you for your attention.
Minister, thank you so much for reminding us of the urgency for the world to both acknowledge and support women leadership. We just want to remind our attendees and people watching on television that you're welcome to interact with us on social media or on the platform using the hashtags #CALML2020 or #Luthuli Legacy or #Segwanele. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, and just to talk about context and how important it is for us to be having this conversation right now as we mark the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. Our keynote speaker today participated in the presidential dialogue on Friday on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So how appropriate, and we imagine that in her conversation, she will be including parts of the very important things she highlighted on that day about Generation Equality Forum and also the Unite by 2030. We imagine she will be touching on a bit of these. But let's bring on now the chairperson of the Luthuli Museum, who are our hosts today, Mr. Important Mkhize. You may make your presentation as you prepare to announce the keynote speaker. Mr. Mkhize, are you there? A bit of a delay. I'm gonna just wait to see if Mr. Mkhize joins us now to introduce.
Can you hear me, Desiree?
Perfectly, thank you. You may take the stand.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I would like to acknowledge the following. The Honorable Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, MEC for Finance, Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Keynote Speaker, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Under Secretary General and Executive Director, UN Women, Chairperson of Luthuli Foundation, Mr. Phumzile Luthuli, Dr. Albertina Luthuli and Luthuli family, Professor Lobogile Moletsane, JL Dube Chair for Rural Education, and all protocol observed. I think Ukabazele and Nyambose both have extended acknowledgement to the rest of the people. I can't repeat. Safe to say that all protocol observed. I would like to join the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture in welcoming our guest speaker on today's annual lecture of Inkosi Chief Luthuli, which will be delivered by Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the Undersecretary and Executive Director for UN Women. Phumzile is no stranger in the South African political landscape, as she has served in the highest office in the land as a Deputy President of the country. This year's theme of the 14th Inkosi Chief Albert Luthuli Lecture is the 1995 World Conference on Women, whereto for South Africa and the rest of the African continent. This lecture is taking place in a country when the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence on women and children has been launched. While a lot has been achieved in this country at the level of human rights, the gender issue in our country remains a thorn in the flesh, especially the scourge of femicide and infanticide, the rampant killing of women and children. This year's theme is relevant in the sense that it calls for the assessment, review, and evaluation of the resolutions reached in Beijing in 1995, the extent to which we have implemented them, and the shortcomings we have thus far encountered. The lecture, therefore, should be able to provoke discussions and conversations on how we should deal with the challenges we are encountering as a country. It is clear that through many of the pronouncements Luthuli made on gender confirms him as a leader that was born pragmatic and both pragmatic and progressive when it comes to issues of gender. Therefore, this lecture is an honor to him in taking his ideas and ideals forward. Since this year's theme of the lecture is an international theme, the Luthuli Museum, therefore, prides itself for having made an appropriate choice by choosing the Undersecretary General and Executive Director for UN Women, Dr. Phumzile Ngcuka. This is an office which has a bird's eye view of what is happening at the international terrain insofar as the issues of gender are concerned. Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka joined the United Nations in 2013. She has devoted her life and career to issues of human rights, equality, and social justice. She has worked in government, civil society, and the private sector. She was actively involved in the struggle to end apartheid here in South Africa. From 2005 to 2008, she served as the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, overseeing programs to combat poverty and bring advantages of a growing economy to the poor, with particular focus on women. Prior to that, she served as Minister of Mineral and Energy from 1999 to 2005, and Deputy Minister in the Department of Trade and Industry from 1996 to 1999. She was a Member of Parliament from 1994 to 1996 as part of South Africa's first government. She is the founder of the Mlambo Foundation, which supports leadership and education. A long-time champion of women's rights, she is affiliated with several organizations devoted to education, women and empowerment, and gender equality. On that note, it is my honor to introduce and welcome Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka to deliver the 2020 Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture. I thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Honorable Minister Nathi Mthethwa, Chairperson of the Luthuli Museum, Mr. Important Mkhize, Chairperson of the Luthuli Foundation, Mr. Mthunzi Luthuli, Dr. Albertina Luthuli and the Luthuli family, members of council, esteemed guests, dear South Africans, thank you for the opportunity to deliver the 2020 Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture in this momentous year, where we are celebrating the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. It is also during the 25 days of activism to end violence against women. I would like to pay my respects to Chief Albert Luthuli and to Umama Nogukanya. Both of them were leaders. We salute both of them and appreciate deeply the contribution and the sacrifices they made for our country and for our liberation. We are thankful for his ANC presidency and his contribution to the foundation of our democracy in both character and substance. Our constitution, I would argue, reflects the values of Chief Albert Luthuli. His values shine through in our constitution, and in that way, his legacy lives on in our constitution. Distinguished guests, the theme for today's lecture is the 1995 Conference on Women, where to South Africa and the rest of the continent. Let me begin by reflecting on South Africa's participation in Beijing 25 years ago. South Africa had a strong and a formidable delegation. Remember, it was in 1995. Our delegation was led by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. We were fresh coming from our 1994 democratic elections, and we were idealistic, we were determined, and we were eager to contribute to the global discourse on gender equality, as well as to engage in changes that will change our circumstances in our own country. In Beijing itself, African women stood strong. They were together, they were organized. They influenced the 12 critical areas that were adopted in Beijing. Since then, we have seen some changes and progress in the implementation of these areas. Nevertheless, change that has been significant and yet brittle, uneven, and also reversible, but nevertheless, change that has mattered. Gender equality is a public good, not a project for NGOs who have shouldered much of the responsibility in many countries. It affects more than half of humanity. It has an intergenerational impact. Gender equality determines the level of development as well as the type of development any country will undergo. And therefore, it cannot be achieved without significant involvement of government. The progress that we have seen happen as a result of the Beijing Declaration in many countries has been influenced by this combination of government determination and activism of citizens. The greatest progress took place in countries where women also have been able to work collaboratively with government. And we have seen governments, therefore, investing significantly in the implementation of the Beijing platform. For example, most poor countries, especially on our continent, invested in girls' education and health. And this made sure that there was significant enrollment of girls, especially at primary school level. They invested also in women's health, and they managed to decrease maternal health. Globally, maternal health decreased by 38% by 2019. Governments also created institutions and mechanisms such as women's ministries, women's commissions. You will remember, distinguished guests, that before Beijing, we did not have those kinds of institutions. These were institutions that were meant to push forward gender equality, albeit very poorly funded. In South Africa, we did all of what I have referred to: girls' education, health, and establishing institutions. Many countries also changed their legislation and passed new legislation that promoted gender equality. They also changed constitutions to make sure that they were in line with the promotion of gender equality. In South Africa, as far as the legal framework was concerned, we were in better shape because of our constitution and the redeeming legislations that were passed in the first parliament, which was addressing different discrimination that we had inherited. To date in the world, 131 countries have participated actively in changing their laws, and 35 countries have amended their constitution so that they are in line with the promotion of gender equality. The changes have affected more than 2 billion girls and women in the world. The laws that have been changed are laws that have to do with especially violence against women, FGM, the age of marriage, which were laws to stop child marriage, citizenship, custody, property ownership, and much more. And many of these areas, as you know, distinguished guests, are life-changing. However, still more than 1 billion women in the world, as we speak, still live in jurisdiction where some of their rights are not protected in law. In some countries, as high as 75% of the rights of women are not protected in law. So this work continues, and in fact, it is the work that occupies my office much more in every part of the world, and especially in Africa. Where we have customary law and religious law, the work is much harder. In South Africa, we are therefore not in the worst positions, but we have remnants of customary laws that we need to pay attention to. For instance, we have to decisively address the concept and the practice of ukutwala, which is blatant abuse to girl children. We have also seen positive, at the same time discouraging changes in women's participation in leadership, which was on top of the agenda in Beijing. While most countries and political parties, like in South Africa, have promoted women's leadership, in some cases, in different countries, it has been the electorate that has reversed the gains. We, however, have witnessed sustained progress in countries where there are temporary measures, such as targets and quotas. In South Africa, the determination by the ruling party for inclusion of women has been important to sustain participation of women in public office. Data tells us that the global average of representation of women in parliaments is only 25%. This means that in the world, all the laws that govern us are made by 75% of men. The number of women in leadership position, both in the public and private sector, is squeezed into a corner of 25%. This number clearly shows that we have work to do in order to attain parity, which is 25%. Women in boards on global average are only 25%. Most countries have also underperformed in the economic development of women. In general, economies are not structured to assist gender equality, even when they have passed laws to support women economically. The structure of the economy tends to work against women. For example, equal pay. In many countries, we have the laws that are promoting equal pay, but there are no mechanism to influence the implementation of these laws. Women are put down by the glass ceiling and the burden of care at home, which keeps women out of the labor market and compromises their sustained development and upward mobility in the workplace. It makes motherhood a penalty, while it gives rewards to fatherhood, as the ILO would present it. This is one of the most significant areas that has to change in order to facilitate gender equality. The unpaid care crisis has also been exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic that we currently face. So has the problem of violence against women in South Africa and all over the world. Women have engaged in the fight against gender-based violence, but we have not been able to see the desired results. Governments and community religious bodies have also taken on the fight. As of September 2020, 155 countries have passed laws against domestic violence. 140 countries passed laws against sexual harassment in the workplace. But effective implementation and allocation of resources required to end gender-based violence and for gender-based violence to be made histories have fallen short. In this area, change is desperately needed, including in our country. We have learned about the importance of targeted interventions in the past 25 years, and I've made the example of education and health, where some change were experienced because the interventions were targeted. We stopped everything when the world faced the corona pandemic. That is targeted intervention. All hands have been on deck in the world to fight this pandemic. We now know that when countries are determined to fight a pandemic and any enemy in their own shores, they can do it. We want to see equivalent determination in the fight to end violence against women. Countries closed borders. Countries made people to stay at home for their safeties. Frontline workers were deployed and they have worked selflessly 24 hours of the day. We need to see frontline workers for ending gender-based violence everywhere in the world, working just as hard. Distinguished guests, This pandemic threatens to erode modest gains that have been made since Beijing. One thing that we have learned from the past pandemics is that there is no gender-neutral pandemic. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as I've said, we have seen the escalation of violence, which we have called the shadow pandemic, as well as the burden of care. During lockdowns, when schools were closed, and at the height of the lockdown, 106 billion learners were out of schools. In this context, we have seen also the importance of digital infrastructure everywhere. And there is a gender digital gap which needs to be closed. But we have to provide digital infrastructure for children everywhere in the world. When children are at home, also the burden of care increase because it is women and girls who will look after other children, after sick people, and of course, also after old people. I want to emphasize this issue of unpaid care. It is estimated to cost currently in the United States an amount of up to $67 billion US, and will hit $147 billion by 2050. In South Africa, unpaid care is estimated to be 26% of the economy, estimated to be 600 billion rands. These are values that are important because it means that women are shock absorbers of underperformance in the provision of infrastructure that should assist women to cope with care. South Africa, just with dealing with the child care infrastructure backlog, would create jobs and would enhance the quality of education for girls. It requires a solution. Excuse me. I understand you cannot see me.
We can see you. We can see you, Undersecretary.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, well, I got a message that you can't see me. Okay, sorry. Let me start again, or rather, let me end on the issue of unpaid care, which is important to address and can be addressed and has benefits. Now, let me talk about education, which is one of the areas where we have seen progress in the last 25 years, including in South Africa. If we cannot provide digital infrastructure, this one area of progress from the Beijing Declaration would also be undermined. We therefore call for the involvement of everybody who can to address the digital infrastructure, especially in communities where it does not exist. Economic restructuring, which has also been highlighted and exposed, the need for economic restructuring, which has also been highlighted by the inadequacy of access to economic benefits in the corona pandemic, has shown us that women still remains the most affected demographic by poverty. Coronavirus unemployment has impacted on women significantly. Women in the informal sector, women in the service sector, women in the tourism sector. We therefore need to address this. This is indeed one of the areas in the Beijing Declaration that was highlighted. We need to build back better, and building back better also means that we address and change our economic policy so that it enables the benefits for women that are significant and meaningful. This is a conversation that is needed globally. It is needed in South Africa to define what does building back better mean. We have been talking in different countries about building back better. We need a social contract that will ensure that we rebuild in a manner that will make sure that we are better than before the pandemic. Let me go back to Chief Luthuli and say that his presidency had many important qualities that are needed at this time. During his tenure, the ANC mounted a defiance campaign and fought and mobilized people from all walks of life in an inclusive way. Changes that we need to overcome the crisis that we are in now needs to be inclusive. Something that the world also needs at the AU, at the G20, and in other forums. Ngozi Albert Luthuli's presidency also reached out and brought together the different components of the broader Congress alliance, including the ANC, of course, the South African Indian Congress, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, the Colored People's Congress, the South African Congress of Democrats, the South African Communist Party, and the Federation of South African Women. Under the mantle of his leadership, the Freedom Charter was adopted. And just like the Charter, the Beijing Declaration and social contract was also achieved between people. Generation equality also promises to be a social contract and to be inclusion of all of those who are excluded, but also to increase the number of people who are fighting for gender equality. The consolidation of the Congress alliance was a strategic move that set the ANC apart. This enabled the ANC to be the tent of the liberation struggle. And it was during his presidency that the iconic Women's March took place, which drew 20,000 women and gave women a seat in the table. At this time, the role of women within the liberation movement was not a done deal. It could not have been easy to forge ahead with significant inclusion of women at a time when patriarchy was strong in our shores. All we can say is, Malibongwe igama lenkosi u-Albert. I also want to point out that under his leadership, the ANC became a strong part of the international context. The ANC was there in 1955 in the Bandung conference. The ANC had a relationship with an iconic Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And of course, he won the Nobel Peace Prize and became the first Nobel laureate for South Africa, which validated our struggle. With her active participation in global stage, it meant that the ANC became also truly internationalist. Dear South Africans, we have been led by integrity, compassion, selflessness, and revolutionary morality. This has to strengthen us to stay resolved and resolute. And I thank you, and I salute and bow to this great leader.
Thank you so much, Under-Secretary General. And I think I want to ask all the participants to just take a moment to take in that very informative presentation by Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. And I'm going to also apologize to the museum because Dr. Albertina Luthuli did indicate that she is not very well right now and would rather not be taking part. But I'd really like to ask Dr. Albertina Luthuli to just respond to that presentation. I can see that she is muted at the moment, so I'm going to ask the administrator to please just unmute Dr. Albertina Luthuli to just give a few lines of a response to this presentation.
Thank you, Miss Desiree, the director. And I greet all who are present this afternoon in the event of honoring my father, Chief Albert Luthuli, and recognizing his role in the struggle for a free and better South Africa. We couldn't have had a better person at this point in time than our guest speaker, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. I think that she's given a broad outline of who, also Nokukanya, his wife, what kind of people they were, how they conducted themselves, and gave all just to make sure that my neighbor lives better if I can help. And I haven't been in any event where I can say that it has come out this afternoon clearly as best it could have been. Somehow, we are faced with these challenges now, where in fact, it becomes necessary that we have people who have the challenges of taking our struggle, forward as the African National Congress. That is the movement Chief Luthuli, spent his life working for, and others like him, We had really people who said this organization is right to take this country and give it the future that it deserves. And I think that we have had that emphasized and put forward in the speech of Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka this afternoon. We need to go and follow that.
Dr. Luthuli, thank you so much. Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka, you gave such an inspirational speech, and there were so many nuggets to pick up there. But I'm just going to touch on a few points. But first, I want to ask you, can you share with us the time that you felt a connection with Dr. Chief Albert Luthuli? What inspired you most about his work? And I think this is for the benefit of young South Africans, especially those who are not very engaged with the subject, to just find out from a person such as yourself what the essence of the Chief Albert Luthuli brand is.
Thank you, Desiree. I have felt the connection with Chief Albert Luthuli really from when I was young. As you know, I come from KZN, and I have family literally 5 minutes walk away from the Luthuli home. So we used to look at that home with reverence. too young to have significantly known him, but close enough to feel his presence in that community. But a funny story, Desiree, is that I have been told that Chief Albert Luthuli came to my home when I was about 7 years old in Claremont at Umvuzane. They were canvassing and happened to come to my home to have a cup of water. And of course, the old people were sitting by themselves, and I was very curious to know what was happening there. I think maybe that's why I got my bug for politics. And I insisted in going in there, and my father was trying to keep me quiet in the kitchen. And I went straight, I am told, and just sat on his lap and started singing Siyomlandela uChief Luthuli. And my father said she didn't know why I knew this was the right song to sing and who was that. So I feel there has been that connection. But also, I am a history student as well. So I have read a lot about our leaders, and that also brought me very close.
Awesome. So now you spoke about the entrenched inequalities that the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed. How can South Africa especially, and maybe even the continent, build back better to ensure that we're not just reverting to the old status quo?
Firstly, I think as a continent, notwithstanding that we have been so challenged in South Africa, but all things given, we have handled the pandemic much better than many parts of the world. And Africa as a whole has handled the pandemic much better. And I think we have to say thank you to the president of the AU, our president, for the coordinated effort of the AU under his presidency. And this coordination, which has helped us to contain the virus, must also be used for building together again. Because the challenges that we have seen have told us that we were not in a good place before Corona. Our policies are entrenching inequality. So building back better is not only about the economic stimulus, which by its nature is purposed for short-term intervention. Building back better, it is about addressing the underlying problems and restructuring for the long term. It is also about ensuring that where we have been falling short, for instance, the fact that we do not have universal access to water or to sanitation and the digital infrastructure, building back better means that we fix those problems. Because, Desiree, it is not whether we will have another pandemic, it is when we will have another pandemic. We can accept that there will be another pandemic in the world, and we should not, as South Africa, as the world, and as Africa, be in the same position. We have to address these areas that we can see clearly will always be a problem. We cannot build a growing and a thriving economy without addressing the fundamentals. And building back better is also about building back green, so that we are also addressing climate change. It is about gender responsive economies, so that we are not leaving women and girls behind for the long term.
You sounded very enthusiastic during the presidential dialogue when you were talking about generation equality, a new feminist agenda for the world, to launch a set of concrete ambitions, transformative actions to achieve immediate and irreversible progress towards gender equality. And you also spoke about it just now. How will generation equality be achieved, and what is your call to action for all of us today?
Generation Equality, as you know, is a campaign that is attempting to finish the unfinished business in the Beijing Declaration, as I tried to show in my lecture, that we have progressed, but we have done this, but we have to remove the but. This is what generation equality is about, but it is also about expanding the stakeholders that we are working with and increasing the investment so that the work that we do, the interventions that we have are responding to the size of the problem. Generation equality also requires government to be involved, private sector, men and boys, traditional leaders, religious sector, young people especially, and of course, civil society and the women's movement. It is through generation equality that, for instance, we should have a formidable strategy to end gender-based violence. And I will keep on saying, this is a pandemic. We must fight it like a pandemic, and we know how to fight a pandemic. Generation equality also has economic justice, which South Africa is the leader of within generation equality, is the member state that is leading generation equality together with Sweden. And we need to make sure that we go down and address these underlying problems. Generation equality is about giving young people a seat in the table so that young people can also co-create with us and stand on the shoulders and the history of people like Albert Luthuli.
We thank you very much, Under-Secretary General, and we hope that you will stay with us as we get into the next segment of our session today, and that is a panel discussion. And the reason why I'd like you to stay with us is because we've been encouraging our participants to engage with us on social media and on the platform, and a few questions have come through, and I've just seen one of them that is directed to you that I would like to leave until towards the end of the program. But it's at this moment that I would like to bring back the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Minister Nathi Mthethwa, to engage with us once again in the discussion, and also bring in Professor Relebohile Moletsane, who is the JB Dube Research Chair, Ms. Nise Malange, the Director at BAT Center Trust, and Ms. Nomusa Dube-Ncube, KZN MEC for Finance. Let us now together investigate the conversations that have taken place thus far as related to the theme about 1995, the World Conference on Women, Where To, for South Africa and the rest of the African continent. Minister Nathi Mthethwa, are you available to start this conversation?
Thank you so much. I think we must commend the address by the Under-Secretary, which gives clarity and also makes account on this question globally and touches on South Africa. I think we are at the point where, as we confront the scourge, this pandemic of gender-based violence, we need to be bringing in an important aspect, which we have not over a period of time. Women have raised issues, they've marched, they've expressed anguish, and they've done everything. We are, as a department, decided that we need to make a contribution, and a focused one on men. Men particularly focusing on our sons, the boy child. The boy child, as you would have noticed, Desiree, that in my introductory remarks here, I speak about this thing of household chores. This thing of gender-based violence and femicide is not cultural. There is no African culture which condones that. It's a matter of socialization. How do we, as families, within that unit of the family, socialize our children? If we tell a boy child that it's okay to sleep in the bed and not make it, starting from those very basic things, to say that they can use their utensils at home and eat and do everything, but leave those for his sister. We are entrenching a particular paradigm. That boy, by the time he reaches the age, the teenage level, it will be difficult to change him, because we have already inserted a particular mindset that he should not take responsibility. It's not the very big things we talk about, because by the time we say down with gender-based violence and femicide to a young man, to a man, it's rather late, because you won't be able to teach the old dogs new tricks. So I think that we, under our program Hulikane, which is Genuch, there's Genuch, it's enough as a society, let us have men. We have not spoken as men, and our silence means that it means consent, actually. So that's the focus of our program, together with other many initiatives, because we'll have to tackle the energy, the resources we've put in tackling the pandemic, the Undersecretary was referring to, Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka, is the kind of energy which is needed here that men must take up. That's the focus at the moment, Desiree.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, KwaZulu-Natal plays a very significant role in South Africa's economy. It is the second largest contributor to the country's GDP. The province contributes 16% to the national GDP after Gauteng's share of 34%. So our next contributor has got quite her job cut out for her as the KZN MEC for Finance, Ms. Nomusa Dube-Ncube. Your thoughts about whether we've started to see fruits from the outcomes of the Beijing conference?
Good afternoon, Desiree. Good afternoon. I wish to acknowledge the Minister. I do wish to acknowledge our sister and our leader, our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Undersecretary General, Executive Director, UN Women. I also do wish to acknowledge Professor Mkhize, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of the UKZN. I also, please allow me to acknowledge as well the chairperson of the Luthuli Museum, Mr. Mkhize, as well as the members of council, the chairperson of Luthuli Foundation, Dr. Mthunzi Luthuli, as well as the Dr. Albertina Luthuli, and the whole family. Really, the political leaders, the traditional leaders, religious leaders, fellow panel members, and all the ladies and gentlemen that are joining this very important session here. I do wish to convey our congratulations for this lecture to both the foundation, the Luthuli Museum, as well as the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. What is even more exciting for me and for us as KwaZulu-Natal is that with this lecture is being held through the webinar. And of course, KwaZulu-Natal is family being put on the global map. And we know that since the outbreak of the COVID-19, we've seen, a number of a globe being turned upside down. And indeed, in our minds, a lot of, economies have been affected. And indeed, our economy as well here in the country and in our province had been hardest hit by the COVID-19. Notwithstanding the topics of discussions that we are indeed hard at work in trying to recover and restructure, as well as transform our economy, various sectors of our economy that have suffered job losses as a result of the COVID-19. This is a period to us that we are working very hard, particularly women, to fast track the entry to women into tourism sectors, as well as in a number of other sectors. Importantly, today, as we are proud to be a home of the first African recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, Inkosi Albert Luthuli. Program Director, the big question is, what then would Inkosi Albert Luthuli say to us today with the outbreak of COVID-19 and the world standing on the brink of the technological revolution that has altered its current socio-economic and industrial landscape? And we are seeing fundamental shift in how we produce, consume, and relate to one another. And we have been emphasizing as a province that we need to invest, particularly in the machinery. We need to invest in manufacturing. We need to invest in ensuring that we utilize a lot of our raw materials rather than sending our raw materials so as to beneficiate our communities. And I know that my leader there, my sister, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, even when she was the then a minister of minerals and energy, she was hard at work trying to ensure that we beneficiate our gold here in South Africa. I was one of those at the youngest age. She was trying to let us to learn about how to make sure that we utilize our raw materials to turn even our own bits to beneficiate and make our own bits to have the value add. And today I was looking at the weather when it was drizzling, Program Director, and continuously drizzling even this morning. And I was thinking about it as a good luck indeed. And we know that water is life. And Inkosi Albert Luthuli's parents had named him Mvumbi, which means continuous rain. And I want to believe that he is blessings to this discussion today about the role of women in society. And the rain is a source of life. And Inkosi Albert Luthuli gave life to women's empowerment and to the struggle for the emancipation of women. And Inkosi Luthuli is encouraging all of us to look back into that delegation of 1995 that was led by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and many other eminent South African women that led us after that Free South Africa to the 4th World Conference of Women with the theme Action, Equality, Development and Peace. And even as these women were carrying hopes and dreams of millions of the fellow countrywomen, at that time, we know that even today, we are still, as women of many countries, as women of this country, still are experiencing poverty, illiteracy, cultural, traditional, and religious stereotyping of women, maternal mortality, and many other issues where we really need to still work even harder as women leaders. So this afternoon's Albert Luthuli is imploring on us to look at the stride that have been made by our country. And indeed, we have made, a lot of stride. And indeed, there is still also a lot for us to do. And, as we know that we have learned many teachings from Nkosi Albert Luthuli, and his teachings and philosophy to spread the message of peace, not only to South Africa, but to many of the regions around the world that are still, having conflicts. We also learn from Nkosi Luthuli's principles that women have a voice too, that women do not need necessarily or want to fight for their recognition or equal rights for access to levels of economy. And in fact, that women are also inherent, safeguards that inherent right to the equal opportunities to the levers of economy. So it is underscored by the April 17, 1954 Women's Charter in Johannesburg, where the concept of us and them was dispelled by the notion of single society, where it was embraced during the Convention of Women, where it was said, and I quote, "We women do not form society separate from men. There is only one society, and it is made of us both, women and men. As women, we share the problems and anxieties of men, and we join hands with them to remove the social evils and the obstacles to progress," and I end quote. So Sis Phumzile, you and many of our leaders and all of us, many other women who have been accorded this opportunity here this afternoon, and also in government and many multilateral institutions, as you carry the aspirations of millions of women, we do not fail, we dare not fail the vision of Nkosi Albert Luthuli, who campaigned for emancipation of women. And we believe that South Africa could not be free when women did not own land, or women who were not educated, did not participate in the economy, or did not have a voice in the political and governance system. We need to ensure that we even work harder and fast track the realization of Nkosi's dream. So today, as we honor the embodiment of wisdom of the man who committed his life to fight for social justice, equality, and democracy of women's rights, he may not be here when our constitution was drafted, but he laid the strong foundation for what is contained in that constitution. He may not be here. He might not have been here when women traveled 1,000 miles to China to represent the hopes of women. But he gave the cause, the guidance, and why it is important for us to continue to work for women's struggle, to ensure that the technology divide that is still there, we ensure that we bridge that divide. That is why we are fighting, working hard as KwaZulu-Natal to ensure that connectivity of women in the rural areas, women in all the areas. As we talk the fourth industrial revolution, we want to ensure that even during the COVID-19, when women in our parks could not be able to sell their craft to the visitors that would normally visit, our wild parks, but they could still, sell their craft using the digital, space. Using, our internet connectivity, cooperative could still connect to the SMMEs opportunities. So Nkosi Luthuli would have emphasized the fact that the ANC-led government across all spheres must remove the red tape to ensure that our procurement systems support women-owned businesses in order to reignite the socio-economic development. So by and large, Desiree, the digital economy in its entirety provides endless opportunity for our women to participate in the economic opportunities, but also during these times of COVID, to ensure that we even have the apps that are able to support women fight the gender-based violence. We've seen the apps that have enabled women to be able to report, the violence, smartphones that are able to connect when women find themselves under threat. We've seen our apps being installed even in the townships establishment, where we have the panic buttons, where we have what we call memeza buttons, and we've even installed the cameras in some of our shisanyamas, and some of our taverns, and a lot of our restaurants in the townships, to ensure that those cameras are even installed with the face recognition cameras, so as to ensure that we are able to detect those criminals and those early detections, to ensure that our women are safe from the criminals and the repeat offenders that have been prying themselves to abusing our women. So we have been fighting very hard to ensure that, using the technology, using the innovation to fight the gender-based violence. So drawing inspiration from Inkosi Albert Luthuli, we wish to commit really to utilize our strengths to intensify our journey of building a stronger province economically and socially, and our special focus to the girl child and women across our province, driven by the ethos of working hard, to committing, to holding hands of our women across all the corners of our province, to ensure that we really are not silenced, but also working with our men to ensure that together we ensure that all our women have got access to all the economic opportunities that are available. Thank you, Desiree.
We thank you very much, MEC, and please stay with us to the Q&A session. But our next speaker comes from a very important institution in KZN, the John Langalibalele Dube Research Institute. And Professor Relebohile Moletsane, your main area of focus is something that even the National Planning Commission, who puts up the National Development Plan, focuses on a lot, an integrated and inclusive rural economy. How does the conversation of equality weave into the kind of research that you conduct?
Thank you, Desiree. I would like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka, for her remarks. I would also like to acknowledge my MEC and the points that she has made with regards to our province and indeed our country. However, I would like to particularly ask the question in relation to rural communities. Are we on course for achieving gender equality by 2030, particularly in rural context? As Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka and the Honorable MEC have pointed out, we have made a lot of progress, but I would like to add another part to the list that Dr. Mlambo-Ngcuka has highlighted. In particular, I want to focus on two of the 12 concerns that were identified in Beijing in 1995. And we've talked a lot about them today as well. And that is gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health and rights. I would like to focus our attention on the possibility or potential of a generation equality that is inclusive of rural girls and young women, a key population that Inkosi Luthuli was concerned about, but one that seldom makes it to forums like the one we have today. I couldn't help but notice that some of the key strategies that were being identified did not particularly take into consideration issues of access, issues of skills for rural girls and communities. But back to my two concerns, gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health. We only have to open the newspapers every morning in our country, and we are shocked by the numbers and intensity of gender-based violence in our country. Most of these newspaper headlines, however, tend to focus on occurrences in urban areas, particularly township areas. Seldom do we hear about occurrences of gender-based violence in rural communities because, understandably, they're hard to reach. Two headlines, I want to highlight two headlines. One from November 2017, with the headline, "Vows for Cows Fuel South Africa's High Teen Marriage Rate, Inside the Life of a Child Bride." And the article by Tashika Pillay and Lwandile Bengu highlighted the story of Noma Sonto. I changed her name, who was 17 at the time, a teen from Loskop, near Escort, KwaZulu-Natal, who had reportedly met and fell in love with her fiancé when she was just 14, and was in 2017 preparing to get married. And her fiancé had paid 11 cows to her parents. The article goes on to highlight that Noma Sonto was joining 91,000 girls in 2016 alone. And of these, 25,000 were in our province, KwaZulu-Natal, who were aged between 12 and 17, who were married, divorced, separated, widowed, or living with a partner as husband and wife, according to a 2016 community survey by Stats SA. A second headline was from yesterday's newspapers, and it read, "Orphaned Eastern Cape girls traded for money and cows." And the article by Sikon Jobani started with the sentence, "Orphaned girls as young as 14 are being abducted and forced by their relatives into marriages with older men in exchange for money and cows." The second issue I wanted to just touch upon is the plight of adolescent girls and young women in rural communities in terms of gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health and rights. We have all read about or heard and talked about the silence and stigma about gender and sexuality in our communities, which tends to intensify in rural communities for obvious reasons. We've also heard about and read about the moralistic or cultural and religious approaches to gender and sex and sexuality education in schools and other institutions. What this has resulted in, or what this perpetuates, is persisting gender inequality and gender-based violence, but also negative health and social outcomes for girls and young women in families and communities. Just as an example, unwanted and unplanned pregnancies, STIs, including HIV and others, marginalization and blame for victims of gender-based violence, which in turn leads to unsafe abortions, femicides, and other atrocious acts of violence against girls and women. But can we intervene against gender-based violence and safeguard the safety and well-being of adolescent girls in rural communities? There is some promising work. For example, the work of Rachel Jukes in the Eastern Cape and elsewhere, Samantha Whelan in the informal settlements in KwaZulu-Natal, and several NGOs working directly with key population in these communities. What is standing out among these projects is that they are community-based and that they are characterized by direct involvement of the girls and young women in understanding the issues that impact them, as well as in identifying and developing interventions that work. So what I would like to suggest then is that while the policy interventions at national and provincial level are much needed, indeed are contributing towards addressing the plight of women and girls in our country. What we need are interventions that are based within communities and that are targeting or are aimed at unearthing the voices of most impacted. And these include girls and young women in communities. And in so doing, we will be enhancing our understanding of the issues peculiar to each context, and indeed developing sustainable intervention. Secondly, I believe that engaging communities directly and community level decision makers in identifying or understanding these issues will also contribute to sustainable change. This involves what we have come to know as a form of a ground-up policy making, which will facilitate or which can facilitate the development and acceptance of contextually relevant and targeted interventions in rural communities. I would like to stop there for now.
Thank you very much, and that is noted. Just to let some of our participants know that our connection on SABC keeps coming on and off. We're off SABC at the moment, but if you would like to continue following the stream, you're welcome to join us on Twitter and on Facebook and these social media platforms. It's the Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture, and we thank our participants so far. But Ms. Nisa Malange, who is the next participant, will be telling us about how the KZN province is using art to reach out to women in KZN and try and find solutions for the multiple scourges such as gender-based violence and inequality that women face. Ms. Malange?
Thank you, Desiree. I'd like to greet my minister, Ubabu Natimtetwa Nyambose, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, MEC Nomusa Dube, Professor Moletsane, Umamu Dr. Albertina Luthuli, my comrades, Important Mkhize, and other guests on the line. I was going through some literature, the book of Umamu Kukhanya, because my biasness is always on women and children. And I was happy, to read that sexual education started at home. Umamu Kukhanya would talk to her daughters about sex and sex education. which is taboo today. A lot of parents don't want to hear that, especially in traditional household. But my other was thinking about the women before us, Abo Mamumboxela, who taught us about the Luthuli detachment. And as I'm listening to Dr. Phumzile Ngcuka, listening to MEC Nomusa Dube, listening to Professor Moletsane, I was taken aback that, as women in this country, from 1948, 1956, the big march, the movements before us, the trade union movement, the women's movement, the youth, we've always worked together. And I think 1995, when Beijing came, I remember the spirit that we had was the same as I imagined the women in 1956 when they were organizing to march against past laws. The rural communities, the townships, the informal settlement, the men and women of this country were no longer called women, were called Beijing. Because Beijing now was what was saying, enough is enough on women's oppression. If we take that excitement with the excitement of 1994-95, that in KZN, we're still experiencing violence in the province. And the KZN women were in the forefront of protecting men and youth. The women in Pietermaritzburg, when they see Amabuto, would come out and say, Libemile. And they would make sure that the young ones, the youth, are safe. And they were the one that would go and get them food and other necessities. As women, we were never scared. We were always in the forefront. It's important to note that this strong foundation laid by unions, women's organizations, media, both alternative and mainstream, from FOSATU to COSATU, Natal Organization of Women, Speak Women's Magazine, the agendas, church organization through Council of Churches, arts organization through a number of organizations, including the Congress of South African Writers Union, and the broader civil society. Community forums were formed and alliances were formed, including student, workers, women, youth, business, to fight crime. Institutions of higher learning were also part of the movement. Organizations in the centers like social legal studies were out there to train communities in paralegal, so that when they listen to cases, they don't just listen, but they advise and refer these cases in the rural community as far as Nutu and Ulundi, Nongoma. Women out there, regardless of violence, were getting the education through alliances that were formed at that time. Youth and women were trained to handle cases and refer them to organizations like the Legal Resources Center, Black Sash, to mention few. Violence and any form of violence was an issue for all of us. It wasn't just for a particular group, for a township, for a community. It was a matter for all of us. A number of forums and organizations were formed, especially in rural communities. I'd like to say, Professor Moletsane, that 95, I think the rural community organization was at its peak. Women were organizing through cooperatives, through, crafters. Women were building creches in order to make sure that their children were safe through agriculture to feed families. So this organization was also brought into communities in our townships because these were means of survival, because a lot was lost during violence, the same way as this pandemic is doing today. Women lost their livelihoods because they were not able to make their craft and sell it, because there were imingcele borders where women were not able to cross. And I think those lessons are the ones that now we're learning and say that nothing should be harboring us from doing what we want to do. One organization that comes to mind is Hlomeli Kusasa, Empowering Ourselves for Tomorrow. Hlomeli Kusasa was led by Mumamu Sarafina, Nabomamu at Valley of Thousand Hills. Valley of Thousand Hills was the center of empowerment of rural women. They were addressing issues of domestic violence, of political violence, as well as of economic sustainability. In one of my engagements with women there was a woman who was coming from a polygamist marriage, and there was a lot of abuse in that marriage. And I remember saying to the group that I feel now free and empowered because I have money and I can make decisions for myself, because women were taught skills to save money from the change that we're making, and they would take that money, not through stokvels, but taught how to save money through banks like Itala in those rural communities. So economic empowerment was also part of the broader struggles of women. Women started engaging tribal authorities in getting more land for plowing and for their own independence. If you remember that a lot of women lost their husbands, and some of them were staying with relatives. And it was difficult for them to participate if they are staying in a place where they're not allowed to be engaged in community activities. So part of their organization was to make sure that the little land that they were getting to plow was extended to community gardens, to more land for them to be able to get together, engage in economic empowerment. Women in the craft were looking at environmental issues as far back as the 90s and saying, if we take the clay and the grass and make our craft, what are we going to do when these things are no longer there? So universities, certain departments were involved to teach them how to replenish the land. And those things were very, very important, for women. So memory, as I'm saying these things, is the memory that I have of our struggles and how, as community of South Africa, all of us in this platform today, we have worked together. We don't need to reinvent new things. We can really go back to what we did and we did successfully and work from that. I thought this background is very, very critical because we easily forget where we come from. We easily forget each other and our participation in the broader struggle, both black and white in this country. And if that unity we can bring, I think that's the unity that can assist us in destroying all the social ills that we have in our society. When Babu Mkhize, important, phoned me about this, I started to think about my own pain and how I've used poetry to deal with my own pain. And when we start 16 days, we had a platform here with the Durban Youth Council, which are the grade 11 kids. And I was listening to their poetry. And I thought, I must not, because I've turned 60 now, and think that I'm old, to fight and to make sure that my voice is heard, because I am the hope for the younger generation, as we are hoping that this young generation will also follow our footsteps and do better than that. I lost my sister in 1999. She was killed in Gugulethu at home, our own home, where I was brought up. And justice was never done. The docket was lost, and so we couldn't follow the case. A grandniece of mine was raped in Gugulethu, and again and again. And then older people called it a generational curse, because if the mother was raped and the grandmother was raped, it became a generational curse. And some say, Shabimbuzi, let's slaughter the goat to take that away. And people go through those things in order to think that they will stop the violence. I think a lot of things have been said, and I think I want to really focus on the violence against women, because the arts cannot thrive if there's still violence, if the nights and our streets are unsafe for women. We will not thrive. So my involvement is always thinking about my audience and thinking about not being able to have young people coming to the events because of the violence. There are a number of places, even within our own creative industries, we have seen and heard about Me Too campaigns. We have seen what happened in the social media, because social media is part of our lives now. And we've seen people saying, Kwanele, we see Foundation Kwanele Mfundisi. If our churches are not safe for us, where are we safe? Violence in the workplace. Unions are very quiet. In 1984, Raditela was killed because he was trying to stop the sexual harassment in the workplace. If those things were happening there before, what is happening today? The scourge is worse. Vanessa Gavenda's memoir, Beaten but Not Broken, deals, Minister Nati, with sexual assaults within our media hubs. And I think similar to what has been happening in the film industry and production houses. Not only in our country, internationally. And she deals with issues of shame, guilt, and fear that we have to talk about and say, yes, I was raped, I need help. That's a shame, particularly when it comes to professionals. The workplace is also another hub of violence against women. The women and children of our country must live free and enjoy the freedom we fought for. Obaba Luthuli didn't just struggle in order for us to be prisoners in our own homes. They fought for us to be able to enjoy this beautiful country of ours. What do we need now to do? I think it was Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka who talked about integrated strategies. I've mentioned those strategies that were there before. We just need to bring them back and intensify them. From our history of organizing under women's organization, civil society, trade union, media, churches, rural community, tertiary institution, schools, and every organizational structure, our knowledge and skills in organizing and mobilizing is needed more than ever now. We need to bring back the spirit of Beijing. When we together, perpetrators must know that Imbokodo ingenile. The men in 1995, they always say, Nanzo ke I Beijing. When we mobilize in our communities to fight violence against women and children, our presence must be felt. Our power is us women organized. We need to begin to respect each other as women and listen to each other as women and support each other as women in every sphere, being government, tertiary, everywhere. When we know that a woman is hurting, let's not make fear of us and we don't speak out. We need to speak out more than ever. The re-establishment of grassroots and community and rural forums is needed. We need to start programs like the self-defense, but teaching women and youth how to negotiate their way to safety in a violent encounter. Mm-hmm. We hear every day that a woman stays at home because she is scared of where she will go because there are no visible safe places, in the communities.
Ms. Malange,
yes, ma'am.
I just want to remind you that we're chasing time. So
okay.
If you wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think I'll start by, safe spaces in our communities. We need to stop families from harboring perpetrators of violence and rape. I want to say that investigation of cases that are either dismissed or withdrawn in order to understand why women do that in SAPS. Train the police on how to investigate cases of violence and abuse. We need to have volunteers in police station, friendly people that can assist women when they go and report their cases. I think more than anything else, the Luthuli detachment of another kind to make GBV history, we need to do that. We fought and conquered. We came in big numbers and marched against injustices. We went back home and intensified our structures. Let us, in one united voice, and say, Kwanele, stop GBV. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malange. I think it's safe to say from all the conversations that have taken place today that women's conversations are intersectional. There are trials, there are tribulations, and just something that the MEC touched on later, I'm going to touch on as well, to show the feminist side of our subject for today, a message by Albert Luthuli to the National Conference of the African National Congress League, 1 August 9:59. It's quite an intriguing one, but the part I like, he is under a ban at this moment and is not able to attend events. And he says, I will look for it. He says, it is indeed a time for women. Let me try and look for that piece where he says, all right. We are indeed in the woman's era, in the liberation struggle of the Union. The freedom road is likely to be long and weary. We shall all need our stoic fortitude and wisdom to face and surmount mountains of problems, troubles, and miseries that are generally met with on the march to freedom. With the heroic contribution of our dauntless women, we shall succeed. I have no doubt. And with that, I'd just like to go into the Q&A session. And I had said to the Undersecretary General that we will be dealing with a question directed to her first. And that question goes as such, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. It says, my question is to Dr. Phumzile on the Beijing Platform Principle. The LGBTQI plus community raised the fact that it does not cover them. One would argue that then we had hardly written our constitution. We have legislation and policies now, but our people feel it's not to their benefit. Looking at the second pandemic of GBV and femicide, what is that we are not doing correctly or can do to improve the gains we have made? Thank you. Ms. Mlambo-Ngcuka, I don't know if you got that question.
Yes, Desiree, indeed, I got the question. And I agree with the person asking the question. In Beijing, there were many areas that were not covered, which in 2020 we understand are important to emphasize. And in some way, in generation equality, that is also what we are trying to correct. For instance, generation equality has added technology and innovation as an area that was not covered significantly in Beijing. And we have, in the addressing of SRHR in generation equality, raised very strongly the issue of women in their diversity. And in particular, we are addressing the challenges faced by women who are gender non-conforming. We are also addressing the issue under women's leadership, where we are trying to make sure that women, whoever they are, whatever their sexual orientation is, are also seen as leaders who must both lead and must also be supported by leaders. So we need to strengthen the organizations that are working to highlight these violations of rights, but also we need to make sure that it does not only depend on the people who are affected. This is a subject that all of us who regard ourselves as feminists need to deal with, because you cannot be a feminist and be homophobic or ageist or racist. Feminism is about being holistic and accepting of all differences and choices that people make about their own lives and their own bodies. So it is, I'm sorry, there is no easy answer to work. It's just the hard work that we have to do, because it's norms and behavior change that we are dealing with. And it sometimes can be slower, but it helps when we have legislation because we have recourse.
In fact, speaking about legislation, MEC Dube-Ncube, here's a question, and it says, the implementation of laws, policies, and availability of resources remains a challenge. How do we overcome this shortcoming?
Thank you, Desiree. I think it's about our commitment. It's about our individual commitments as the people, as the leaders, but also as the society, to ensure that those laws that are there, they're not just laws that are just written, or they're laws that are just spoken about, but that there are laws that becomes living, reality. There are laws that becomes our daily lives that we live by. I mean, a professor was speaking about the daily lives of people in the rural areas. This week, all our provincial members in the cabinet, led by the Premier, we were in all the districts of our province, and each one of us is a champion of each district. And in the district where we work, in Uthukela, it's a rural district, and there we were talking about the things like Ugutwala, things like Uguti, when ingane ishayiwe, then kuhanjiswa imbuzi, or when a child has been assaulted, raped by umalume, we must be quiet because ihlazo. And those are the things that we were talking about openly, to say we cannot, as society, as communities, keep quiet, as neighbors, keep quiet about those things, as amakosi. And those are the things that we're talking about when we're talking about laws. How do we enforce laws? And we're saying, yes, we do have laws, but if we as the people are not making those laws work for us, the laws will just remain a paper, or the leaders will just talk about laws as just talk. And not reality, that is humans and people as numbers, and not as people as living beings that are in pain, as societies that are feeling the pain when we hear those things every day happening in our societies.
Absolutely. Minister Nathi Mthethwa, the last question is for you, and I'm just going to ask you to be cognizant of the fact that we're chasing for 5 o'clock. And the question goes, panic buttons, safety bracelets are a very good idea. They help us take advantage of 4IR. Do we know how many have been distributed amongst women and girls in the rural and urban areas? How can the churches assist with promoting such innovative strategies? Minister?
Thank you very much, Desiree. I wouldn't know offhand the statistics of the panic buttons, but not only churches, I agree, that not only churches, but all in society can help in ensuring that we curb this pandemic so that we realize the potential of women folk in our country. So the best way, or the starting point, is to understand that this is a fundamental societal challenge. It is a very pernicious ideology, and which makes it a mockery if somebody says, I fought against racism, I still fight against racism, but find it within himself to, in a way, perpetuate gender-based violence. So the system and the ideology of patriarchy, it's high time that it's really focused on. It becomes the topic, it becomes the focus of the program, because what the laws of the land does or do, they actually regulate behavior. But the difficulty about that is that they do not regulate, and they can't regulate attitude. If we talk about gender-based violence and femicide, for instance, statistics tells us that these happen, 90% of these happen amongst their acquaintances, happens amongst people who are supposed to be protecting women, be their partners, relatives, and so on, including what the MEC Dube has referred to, this whole thing of communities, of families, when such criminal acts, because these are criminal acts, happen in our society. We then say, no, it's something for the family. There's nothing familial in this criminality, and it has to be approached as such. So I think that as we continue with the laws, because I can tell you, Desiree, that within the different branches of police service in this country, the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit is one such unit in the police, which is working so hard and getting a lot of people sentenced. But the problem is continuing, unabated. So it means it's much deeper than what we would want to see or action we would want to see from the law enforcement agencies to be dealing with the psyche of the nation, that it can't be, we can't be accustomed to what is happening in our society. If it means that we de-emphasize on other matters and focus particularly on this issue of the system of patriarchy in our society, of the patriarchal power relations, which is abused to the detriment of the women folk in this country, that way we'll be able to address the challenge we are faced with.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm glad to announce that the
All right, ending there with Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa. And of course, what we were bringing you live there was the virtual event, the Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture. And the headline speaker was Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, former Deputy President of South Africa, now the head of UN Women. And of course, the plight of women in the spotlight, the emphasis on women on the continent, where to for South Africa and the continent was the theme. And Nathi Mthethwa talking about vulnerabilities, but dispelling earlier the notion that gender-based violence is culturally entrenched. But he did say the attitudes, when we bring up young boys, for example, those can be entrenched from an early age. All right, we move away from that live event now. I'll be back with your top stories at the top of the hour very shortly.